some conservative Christian outlooks tend towards authoritarianism. They take this view of God and his ultimate authority and apply it to men at times, and at this time, a government. And they're prone to that loyalty to such an extent that they will allow that authority to call evil good and good evil. And I think we have seen many pastors do that, unfortunately. And it's that is the scariest thing.
Hello, and welcome to Secular Spotlight. I'm Kyle Steinberg, a legal fellow at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. You have likely seen the terrifying videos coming out of Minneapolis, where ICE raids have disrupted and destroyed families and communities. The situation boiled over when an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen. Following that incident, thousands more protesters have taken to the streets. One of them, Alex Pretti, another U.S. citizen, was also killed by an ICE officer after being disarmed and pinned to the ground by multiple agents. Today, we're going to try to get a better understanding of what's happening in Minnesota and see how secular legislators are responding to this escalation of violence from federal officials. Joining me today is Mickey Dollens, FFRF's Regional Governmental Affairs Manager, who's also a state representative in Oklahoma, and Minnesota State Representative Andy Smith. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks for having me.
So on January 6th, the Trump administration announced the deployment of thousands of immigration agents and officers to Minnesota as part of what it called the federal government's largest immigration operation ever. Just one day later, Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed by one of these agents. Now, reports and videos from Minnesota show ICE agents stopping people on the street to demand citizenship papers, disrupting communities, and detaining protesters and legal observers, often using force to do so. Last weekend, thousands of people flooded the streets of Minneapolis in protest to demand ICE leave Minnesota. FFRF legal director Patrick Elliott lives in Minnesota and joined the protests last weekend. And here's what he experienced.
As a Minnesotan, I felt compelled to start to do something. And I know for people, what's been going on with ICE in the Twin Cities has been, very just detrimental and problematic. And people have had different things that have started to prompt their involvement. For me personally, I have a 6-year-old and 4-year-old boys. And just last week, there was a 5-year-old boy in the Twin Cities who the school is saying it's basically used as bait for ICE to arrest his father, and a family pleading to leave the boy, but they also detained him and have since sent him to Texas. Liam Ramos is his name. And so that, to me, just with my own family, I wanted to become involved. Besides the violence and the killings that have happened, a lot of people here in Minnesota have been very upset. And I as well as my wife, we wanted to do something to start to become involved. I have a lot of family in the Twin Cities, and although I was not able to attend the big, large protest in Minneapolis, I ended up going on Sunday just to a suburb and trying to do something, holding signs on a street corner with about 40 other protesters on different locations, putting their own signs and messages together, just trying to be visible and trying to do something to let other people in our community know we don't think this is acceptable and that we want ICE out of Minnesota. I'm not one that has been to many protests or demonstrations. In my life, this is probably only the third protest I've been to. People were supportive, about 20-1. People were waving, honking, had their own signs in their own vehicles. Just a real sense of community that ordinary people are trying to do something here. And that was helpful to me as a civil rights lawyer. We try to use the courts and try to do things a certain way. But I think I felt good and I felt inspired that just normal people were out there on this 0-degree day trying to do something and trying to tell other people that this is not acceptable and that we want respect for the Constitution, we want respect for civil rights, and we want immigrants to be treated fairly.
So I want to bring in Representative Smith. And I guess just to start things off, how are you doing? And having heard Patrick's experience, what has your experience been on the ground in Minnesota?
It's hard to answer the question how we're doing. I've joked with several people that a lot of our greetings in our society aren't really meeting the moment. How are you? Good morning. Hope you have a nice day. For Minnesotans right now, those seem a bit hollow because it is a daily struggle. And I want to be clear that I represent a district, 25B, that is in Rochester, Minnesota, about 90 minutes south of the Twin Cities. And we are every day also seeing ICE in our communities, kidnapping folks, taking folks from daycare centers. It is everywhere in this state. It is truly a federal occupation, and it is a unprecedented time in the United States history. This has not been seen in the United States, and how to react to this sort of federal campaign of terror and unconstitutional law enforcement against its own citizens is shocking. And we are struggling every day with it, but we also see an incredible response from Minnesota. There's a great article in The Atlantic that talked about how Minnesota is proving the MAGA agenda completely wrong, where people are supposed to be afraid of their neighbors, where they're supposed to not live with those who are different from them in harmony. But Minnesota is that. We're an incredibly diverse state. Not just racially, but also across the spectrum, whether that is financially, whether that is where we come from, what language we speak. And yet, in this moment, we are banding together almost universally to help neighbors in this situation, to whistle when ICE comes to our communities, to deliver groceries, and really trying to find any way we can step up and help each other. And it is working. Minnesota will not be broken. We will stand and we will win in this struggle.
Yeah,
Representative, you've displayed amazing leadership during these tumultuous times. I follow your social media, and you've done an excellent job of documenting, being on the ground, talking to the people. How have you experienced your constituents? How are they surviving this? How are they going about their day to day? It's like you said, it's hollow to say good morning. How are people carrying on day to day when there's so much turmoil going on in the streets and within our federal government?
Thank you for your kind words. I mean, it's really unprecedented. It seems like a word that is losing its meaning, but it is hard to describe day to day because, of course, there are still day to day things that need to get done. All of us still need to cook dinner. All of us need to put our kids, if we have them, to bed and take them to school and make sure they do their homework in the midst of literally hearing whistles outside and knowing that there are federal agents in your neighborhood that may be taking some of your neighbors. U.S. citizens, legal residents. So it's difficult. I mean, the range of what we're trying to do are myriad. As I said, from dropping off groceries to doing wellness checks for folks, to connecting people to legal resources. I mean, in the state of Minnesota, every elected representative at the state level is legally a notary public, and we have been using that to help notarize custody papers for parents, not knowing what will happen if they are taken by ICE and disappeared for several days, what will happen to their children and where they can get care. So it is a real across the board. And, we as elected officials are doing what we can. Again, thank you for your kind words about trying to communicate what's happening, trying to document what's happening, the unconstitutional actions that is happening. But the community as a whole is responding in incredible ways. I was just at a training on Saturday about just constitutional observation, knowing your rights, what you can do, what you can't do, what the Constitution protects people in this country to be able to do. And we ran out of chairs. People were standing room only. And again, this is in Rochester, Minnesota, 90 minutes south of the Twin Cities. So as hard it has been, it has also been a time where we get to see the heroism of our fellow Minnesotans. And that's been incredible to witness.
And I'll just say, as somebody, I grew up in the Twin Cities. I have my Minnesota Law sweatshirt on today. I'm a proud graduate. But as someone who no longer lives there, from the outside perspective, seeing the reporting, I know you mentioned the story from The Atlantic. There's such a sense of pride in that community. And not that I ever had any doubt about the people there, but it really is something to see how everybody is just banding together and standing up for each other. What is the state now of ICE, the federal government operations in Minnesota? I know We've seen that Greg Bovino is on his way out. Tom Homan may be on his way in. What can you tell us about what you're hearing from the federal government perspective?
There's clearly a shift in tone, federal government, even up to President Trump changing some of his notes and for the first time having some sort of empathy for the pain that his administration has caused our state. As you said, there seems to be some administrative turnover with Greg Bovino, the commander in the field for Border Patrol, and potentially up all the way to Kristi Noem. But I want to be clear that on the ground, we have not seen those changes take place. I have been on the phone this morning with families who have had family members go missing and trying to find where cars are in our streets that have been abandoned because of ICE operations. We are still getting reports of children being taken around childcare or public education facilities of all kinds. So the change in tone certainly is welcome, but if it's not met by a change in what is happening on the ground, it means very little. It's still an incredibly dangerous situation for Minnesotans, and there are still thousands of federal troops and agents all throughout our state that is concerning. So happy to see potentially maybe the administration sort of setting the table for leaving our state. That's certainly our goal. But if it's not met with a change in tactic at the ground, we are still in a very volatile situation.
And, addressing sort of the tone that you mentioned from the administration, we've seen in the past the administration sort of validating its immigration policies through Christianity. President Trump has made comments to the effect that God is happy with his job on immigration.
I think God is very proud of the job I've done. And that includes for religion. Look at our border. Our border was a disaster. People poured. It was an invasion.
What is your reaction to that, as a secular legislator?
So my position is a little odd in a lot of different ways. If people don't know that are watching this, I grew up in the evangelical church. I actually have a master's in theology. I was in the evangelical world for quite a long time before life took me in another place, and I expanded sort of what I viewed through that lens. So from my perspective, it has never made sense, the sort of Christian rights obsession with immigration, when even the Bible itself is so clear on the mandate to welcome the stranger, to help those who are others. And in the Old Testament, certainly the nation of Israel was asked to welcome immigrants into their nation. So even from a basic perspective, conversations I have had with constituents who are Christians are trying to point out that basic value. But of course, that should be a larger humanist value. And I think what I keep pointing to in Minnesota particularly, and why I'm glad there are some national articles that are talking about this now, is that Minnesota is disproving the fear around immigration policy. Now, I'm happy to talk about immigration policy and how the United States can and should do better. But Minnesota is a place that has had immigrants from all across the country come to our state, from Somalia to Central America, to other areas around the country, Asia. And they have added to the wonderful tapestry that is our state. And we have accepted them, and we have loved them. We see Lutheran Norwegian pastors now standing next to Somali imams, hand in hand at the MSP airport, to say that we don't want this done to our immigrant neighbors. So we are disproving the fear that Trump is trying to stand upon in these immigration enforcement tactics. And getting back to the religious side of things, I mean, that is just another part of the beautiful diversity of what a secular society can be, that we can believe different things about metaphysics, who God is, and what he demands, but also understand that there's this beautiful foundation that all of us can agree upon and have a flourishing society that looks out and cares for one another and is moral and beautiful. And that's what Minnesota is showing.
Andy, you mentioned those humanistic values. Have you noticed any faith leaders stepping up and pushing back against the Trump administration's claims of using divinity and God ordainment to carry out these horrendous ICE raids? Who are some of the faith leaders who are stepping up in the community?
To be quite honest, it's been a pretty amazing response from the faith community at large. I will still say, from a community that I came from, the evangelical community, there's been a stunning silence. But I'll just maybe tell one story in response to that question, Mickey. We were on Friday standing vigil as a community outside of a mosque, the biggest mosque here in Rochester, to make sure that ICE was not going to try to do anything with worshipers who were attending there. I went there. I said someone who has a master's of divinity in it from an evangelical school. We were there with a couple of Jewish rabbis. There was also several people from a local Lutheran and United Methodist congregation, and a couple of people who said they don't go to church and never have gone to church. But it was a group of about 20 of us that were there, and just making sure that nothing happened to our neighbors while they were worshiping in the way they chose to worship. And then in response, the leaders of that mosque came out and gave us snacks, and they brewed tea for us. And we had this beautiful moment in the street of sharing that fellowship where we all had clearly stated differences in one of the most divisive things in the history of humanity, faith. And yet we were able to come together. It's just a beautiful scene of what can be done to hold these principles together. That is why it is so disappointing for more conservative congregations at large to be either silent or at worst cheering on the terror in the streets and thinking that that is somehow a theological value. That has been incredibly difficult. I would say for me personally, as someone who has ties to that community, but I think generally also to the state of Minnesota, seeing faith leaders in that light has been damaging.
And why do you think that is, the silence? I've noticed there are lawmakers as well who aren't speaking up on this very important issue. Not only are we seeing First Amendment rights being violated, but Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. What can you give to advice to other lawmakers or other people in clergy to find the courage to stand up for our humanistic values?
I certainly think there's two things to emphasize there. The first, I think, is what you mentioned, courage. I think there's a large, maybe not large, but I think there's a big portion of maybe evangelical or conservative faith leaders who know this is wrong, know that their leadership in a religious setting sort of mandates that they should speak out against these ills. And even outside from an American context, just a human context, the human suffering that is being caused. And yet it is going to be quite costly because we know that the Trump administration really stands and falls in this country based on the evangelical community. And they are the community that have really propped up his administration in so many areas. And so I think there's going to be a cost for those leaders that do stand up. Now, I would emphasize that a teaching of Christianity is certainly to have that moral courage, even if it will cost you, maybe especially if it will cost you personal loss. However, I think that is certainly a thinking why people are quiet and hoping that this goes away. The second one I think is more terrifying, which is, and I've spoken about this before, that some conservative Christian outlooks tend towards authoritarianism. They take this view of God and his ultimate authority and apply it to men at times, and at this time a government, and they are prone to that loyalty to such an extent that they will allow that authority to call evil good and good evil. And I think we have seen many pastors do that, unfortunately, and it's that is the scariest thing. Certainly, ideology is an incredibly powerful force. Political ideology is an incredibly powerful force in our world, but religious ideology is an even more powerful force we know from human history and where we're at currently. And we have seen that abused all throughout our history, and that is a truly terrifying thing. And that's where Christian nationalism, as we talked about, is a real threat to the peace and prosperity of the United States and its people.
So I'm curious, and this can kind of go for both of you since you're both legislators. How have you seen secular legislators respond, not only in Minnesota, but also across the country? And maybe Mickey, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, Kyle. Representative Smith and I are both members of the Future Caucus. It's primarily of young legislative elected officials from around the country. And we have a letter going around right now that, as of last night, more than 380 state lawmakers have signed. Mm-hmm. The letter demands that ICE and Border Patrol leave Minnesota. We are demanding a full and independent investigation into the shootings of Good and Pretti. And we also demand an ending further congressional funding for ICE. As state lawmakers, there's not a ton we can do when it comes to the federal government with the supremacy clause. But we can, as elected officials who have a platform, use a platform to amplify the voices of our constituents. We have social media, we have connections to our federal delegation, and even in Oklahoma, I've been using those lines of communication to express these sentiments to federal elected officials. But when it comes to also more at the local level, we're looking at detainment facilities looking to be built in the Oklahoma City area right next to schools. And this is where the power of the people really come into play. Showing up at your council meetings, making those phone calls, making your voice heard, and making those phone calls even when you think they don't matter, because they absolutely do. As you can see, there's been a slight tone, and as Representative Smith said, it hasn't resonated onto the streets yet, but we see that Minnesota National Guard is unmasked with yellow vests on, getting to build trust again amongst the community. We're seeing Bovino out and other changes happening, and then also communication between Walz and President Trump. So Americans don't like what they're seeing, and even Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt went on national television and said that. And so why does this come about? It's not because they just had a turn in their moral compass. It's because of the outrage and the people making their voice heard that is starting to turn the dial backwards. And so that's what we need more of. We need people, we need hope. We need to celebrate the changes that we're making, even if it's very incremental, and we need to continue on that way. But as state lawmakers, I like how we around the country are joining together to sign statements in solidarity for the people of Minnesota.
Yeah, and Representative Smith, what is your perspective, obviously being in Minnesota?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Mickey just said as far as using our platform to communicate, especially with the amount of misinformation and AI-generated images that we have seen that are trying to twist a situation that is already quite volatile. So I think as elected officials, it's important for us to make sure that the truth is out there, the stories of our constituents are out there. I thought of two stories very recently based on communication from local officials that really changed things. Mickey mentioned ICE facilities. ICE has been trying to build detention facilities in the Twin Cities for weeks now, most particularly in two sort of third ring suburbs, really classic American suburbs. One is Woodbury, the other one is Shakopee in the Twin Cities. Not deep blue areas. In fact, in Shakopee, my colleague there won only by 14 votes. So it's a very tight district. Both cities had potential areas where an ICE detention facility could have been built, but because of federal outcry, once it became known through official channels that this was being attempted, both of those contracts were rejected by those cities. So there is a tangible difference we can make. As state lawmakers, as Mickey said, there isn't much we can do from a federal funding perspective or to curb particular federal actions. However, there are state laws we can try to change or make very clear things that the state has around law enforcement. We will certainly be introducing legislation like we have seen in California to not allow law enforcement of any stripe, including ICE, to operate within the state with masks covering their faces, using civilian rental cars, things of those natures. I also have a couple specific bills that I'm working on, providing more funding to our Attorney General's office to provide legal assistance for civilians whose constitutional rights were violated, to have some sort of legal recourse funding those positions. So there are particular ways we can do that. It's going to be difficult. We have a tied house in Minnesota currently, but I have been pounding the drum wherever I can that every public leader, local, school board, state, and federal, needs to use every lever of their power, to fight the current campaign of terror that the federal administration is pushing against Minnesota, especially so it can't spread anywhere else in the state, anywhere in the states.
And I believe that ACLU Minnesota also has filed a class action lawsuit that people who are in Minnesota who are U.S. citizens who have been illegally detained and arrested can join that class action lawsuit. Is that correct, Representative?
That's correct. And that's a good reminder. There are two portals, actually. One is ACLU of Minnesota does have a portal. You can upload these incidents and add a class action lawsuit. The Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, has also sued the federal government for immediate relief in this area. And the Attorney General's office also has a portal where where they would like people to upload their interactions with ICE that have been unlawful, both for that lawsuit, but also ultimately to keep a database of this. So as we try to hold those accountable and will hold those people accountable in the future, we have a record of those. You can go to my social media, Instagram, TikTok, wherever. The link in my bio has that database for the Attorney General's office. I would really recommend any Minnesotan that has any interaction with ICE to document it there. If you're looking from outside Minnesota to help in any financial way, standwithminnesota.com is a great resource. There are lots of options, from helping with the Immigrant Law Center in Minnesota, which is helping with a lot of free legal services for immigrants, to grocery pickups, to helping organize constitutional trainings, constitutional rights trainings. All of those things, you can find ways to finance them from anywhere in the country and anywhere in the world by going to standwithminnesota.com. We would be so grateful if you would be able to do that.
Representative, something I think that has gone unreported, I haven't heard much about it in the mainstream news at all, but an economic strike. I understand there was a day of truth and freedom where the people of Minnesota went on a work strike. They refrained from buying things. Economic strikes seem to be pretty effective. Could you speak more on that?
Yeah, it was incredible. We had a general strike the day before, unfortunately, Alex Pretti lost his life to ICE agents, where we saw, for the first time in nearly 50 years, unions from across the board, whether AFL-CIO, whether public employees unions, the teachers union, speak out for a general strike, joining with faith leaders, organizations like Isaiah Minnesota, as well as, of course, public officials like myself, encouraging Minnesotans to have that general strike. And it was incredibly effective, incredibly moving. Hundreds of thousands of Minnesota also joined that general strike on the streets. And by the way, on the streets in the coldest day of the year. And if you're watching this not from Minnesota, our coldest days of the year are no joke. Wind chills reached about negative 40. And yet people were out on the streets protesting peacefully about a need for this change. And it was tremendous. I'm a business owner. We closed our business. Many small businesses, again, here down all the way in Rochester, it was across the state, closed. And it was noticeable. Students didn't go to school. People didn't go to childcare facilities. We had nurses at the world famous Mayo Clinic walk out of their jobs to say that we need this to end. And it clearly had an impact and continues to have that impact.
As you said, 100,000 Minnesotans and not a single act of violence, which is so incredibly important. I think it's important to remind viewers not to engage in any violent activity, because that's exactly what the Trump administration wants, to give them a blanket warrant to go out and declare martial law or whatever they want. So it's important that everyone continue to refrain from any acts of violence and continue the peaceful demonstrations, which are having an incredibly positive impact.
Yep, I just want to echo that real quick, that keep things peaceful. Do not give this administration any excuse to escalate situations. And Minnesotans have been doing that. I've said time and time again, we are focusing our anger not on destroying the cities where we live, but into helping the communities and neighbors where we live. And that is a testament to Minnesota. And I also want to emphasize, at times, the Trump administration has acted like recording federal activity, being constitutional observers, and using your First Amendment rights are in some ways, quote unquote, violent protests. And they are not. I'm speaking here in Minnesota. That is not happening. The people of Minnesota are acting in a way that is over and above incredible patience, incredible kindness in this situation. And I am so proud of my state.
And sort of on that note, as we round out our discussion, I'm curious, you've given us a few stories from what you've seen on the ground, but maybe on a lighter note, in the face of all of this, what have you seen from community members? Any stories you can give us that, give you hope or really show that sense of community that you've talked about?
Oh boy, there's so many. I mean, I think the one that kind of gets me every time as I think about how it happened was not something that necessarily happened to me, but I hear from my colleagues in the cities after the shooting, particularly the third shooting that happened here to Alex. He was an ICU nurse. Sorry, this is a very emotional thing to be had. ICU nurses are some of the toughest emotional people you will meet. They deal in tragedy, and they care for those who find themselves in the worst of situations. And that's what Alex Pretti was. And so his fellow ICU nurses returning to the scene where he was killed and the vigil that they had there, the true just companionship and love that our state has shown as we have lost one of our own is, it's just touching. I mean, as I've said, our days are really, you never know what you're going to encounter. But the nights where we, held candlelight vigils together, just remembering our own who are part of this struggle, will stay with me forever.
The people of Minnesota are a real testament to and an example for the people of the rest of America on how to stand up against tyranny and how to exercise your constitutional rights and to look out for one another. So we applaud you and thank you for your amazing leadership, Representative.
Happy to do what I can. So proud of our state. We have had a year in our state. Don't forget, we also had our Speaker of our House assassinated, a mass shooting in August, and then this action in December. And through it all, we've lost people that we will not be able to get back. But we have also, if possible, gotten closer and comforted and support each other as we have been able.
It truly is amazing to see the examples of community and resolve that are really beautiful, in the face of such danger and such chaos that have come out of the people of Minnesota. So just echoing Mickey and thanking you all for your leadership, as well as the people of Minnesota for showing up for one another. That wraps up this week's episode of Secular Spotlight. Our thanks to Representative Andy Smith for joining us today. If you'd like to support our mission, consider becoming a member at FFRF.org. And please like this episode and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Our legal team works every day to defend our secular constitution. We've stopped unconstitutional prayer in public schools, shut down government-funded religious programs, and much more. If you see a state church violation in your area, you can report it through our website at the link on your screen.